Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dan Dix here from Press for Truth, reporting today with some good news on the GMO front. It seems that Russia has now joined the club as the latest country to ban genetically modified organisms. There are now cultivation bans in Austria, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Poland, and Switzerland. Now, here in British Columbia, GMOs do remain banned in 13 municipalities. The rest of the country, however, as well as most of the United States, cultivates GMO crops. But why? Why grow GMOs or even eat them? The reasons are totally bunk, and here are 7 claims that I will debunk which have been made by the food authorities. Claim number 1, genetic engineering isn't radical technology. Now, I'm not denying that genes of crops are selectively bred for desirable traits. This is a process that does have a long history. Case in point, grain just simply isn't what it used to be. The problem is shifting scientific paradigms, or the lack of. See, in the days of Tesla and Edison, for example, crony investments had marketable purposes. Today's democratic model, however, locks scientific paradigms into place, and it basically prevents bad science from ever going bankrupt. GM crops are a new technology. It'd be like saying today we breed dogs through genetic sequencing, but it's really the same as traditional breeding. Yes, the same genetic process does happen in nature, but our purposeful minds alter nature. Just look around you. I'm not talking to you on some nature-given resource. You and I built that. So is genetics a bad science? Or are scientists merely neglecting the broader role that genes may play in the environment? Well, Rupert Sheldrake empirically proves that genetics isn't just a black or white materialist science. Sheldrake's discovery of a morph resonance throws the genetic paradigm into crisis. It says that self-organizing systems aren't coded in just the genes, but rather on a collective memory from previous members of a species. So it's a further breakdown of the materialist doctrine that we are a bunch of useless atoms just swimming around smashing into each other. So few scientists accept Dr. Sheldrake's findings, and why would they, after all? The statist system has incentives not to destroy itself. In a free market, Dr. Sheldrake may have had more credibility. GM crops may have proven unprofitable or at least banned by more competent jurisdictions. So some say that Sheldrake's popularity or fear of GMOs undermines the public's understanding of the science. I, however, think the opposite is true. I think it undermines the scientists' understandings of markets. You see, pseudoscience does exist. The question is, where is it most prone to blossom? In a free market of ideas, or by status quo immune to adoption? Or in other words, what's more scientific? The market means for breeding crops, or what the coercive corporate state says? You see, why not just legalize free markets and let us find out for ourselves? Despite controlled markets, food is still geared towards consumer demand. Just look around you. Local and organic are more dominant than ever. So GMOs aren't going away, even if they're backed by a state, a coercive force, an illegitimate monopoly. And add to that the corporate power. It's a fascist stew with all kinds of special interests floating about. But don't worry, this same establishment says that GMO crops aren't a radical technology. Claim number 2, GMO crops aren't new. Well, GMO crops first appeared 30 years ago, so in a span of at least 6,000 years, I'd say that they are pretty new. They've only been a commercial product for 20 years now, after all. But we have had this crony capitalist empire for at least 100 years. So when GMO advocates reference all of the scientific journals and the scientific consensus, which to me sounds a lot like the global warming fraud. Well, they're reverting back to the very scientific paradigm that we have just debunked. And we haven't even had a generation live on GMO food yet, but they're telling us that it's okay. But what part of the status-funded scientific consensus can we trust? Special interest groups work to preserve the status quo because, well, the status quo is what makes them money. See, if your paycheck depends on perpetuating the system, well, it's obviously hard to see the system's flaws. But political lobbying does not increase wealth, and it is not good for science. Claim 3, farmers don't want to save seeds anyways. Well, this one is actually true. Why would farmers want to save GM seeds? Corn is a hybrid of 2 species, so it wouldn't last more than a year. I don't see the market ever producing this kind of a seed. It just sounds wasteful. Farmers do save seeds. It's a process that wasn't broken and didn't need any fixing. GMO cotton and soy could be saved, but most large-scale commercial growers just don't even bother. It's just another symptom of farming industrialization. Now, this isn't a process guided by free markets. It's controlled by crony capitalist interests. Our farms are looking more and more collectivized than ever. But even if farmers could save their seeds, signing agreements with companies like Monsanto have prevented them from doing so. You see, intellectual property isn't actually private property in the traditional sense. Claim 4, the only way to feed the world is through GMOs. Yet another example of these pompous, self-righteous scientists just trying to basically tell the market what to do. No, people are starving because of the neo-colonialism of the New World Order, not because they don't have GMO food. There is no reason why the entire world couldn't industrialize and live in a free and prosperous market. There is no limit to human creativity when tasked with feeding the world. So the arguments for GMO usually boil down to climate change or overpopulation and fear over the food supply. Well, these are fear-mongering terms that are used by the control opposition to propel governments to act and try to get them to take more control. Well, the science behind anthropogenic climate change is flimsy at best. Overpopulation has never been a problem, and it's never going to be a problem. And likewise, we will find ways to feed ourselves absent, and this is a very big absent, state intervention. It is always state intervention that ends up starving the masses, like in the Soviet Union or Mao's China, or virtually any country where the government has taken over agriculture. In communist Cuba, however, the collapse of the Soviet Union meant that all of their mechanized farming equipment basically became rendered completely useless. So faced with mass starvation and potential revolt, Castro had to legalize agricultural markets. 20 years later, and there's farmer markets all over the place. And farmers are making more money than doctors, and scientists are working with the farmers on improving techniques and finding natural pesticides through insects and minimal chemical inputs. Now, I am not suggesting that Canada should adopt the Cuban model exactly, but it is worth noting that there's no GMOs, but hardly any capital equipment, yet the country can still manage to feed itself. Other countries may ban GMOs, but really it's communist Cuba that has really debunked the GMO argument that we need GM crops to feed the world. Claim number 5, GMOs don't cause health problems. Yeah, we know this because the FDA said so. Yes, that is their actual answer. GMO advocates admit that, yes, genetic engineering can end up introducing hazardous proteins, especially allergens and toxins, into the food chain. But, of course, the FDA bureaucrats regulate companies like Monsanto, so it's okay. Well, then let's consider this for a second. In 2009, just as President Obama was taking office, 9 scientists and physicians working at the Food and Drug Administration, well, they sent him a letter openly stating and giving examples of FDA corruption at the very highest of levels. Now, the FDA admits the letter's authenticity, and this, of course, is just one example. I don't need to remind everyone here or at home or wherever you are that the FDA is in bed with pharmaceutical and agricultural companies. This just goes without saying. Anyone who trusts the FDA monopoly, well, isn't really thinking this through. There is a reason GMO producers are among some of the largest contributors to political campaigns. Claim number 6. It's not just Monsanto. All research says that GMOs are okay. Well, clearly not. GMO advocates just don't consider any counter-argument to be factual. Peer pressure is at an all-time high in peer-reviewed journals. State funding is a poor means to advance science. If not funded by crony capitalists in a fascist market, scientists are funded by the state universities or the World Health Organization technocrats. There are better ways, of course, ways that don't involve any corrupt intentions, bureaucratic funding, or the suppression of dissident facts. Claim 7, GMOs don't spread to other crops and wild plants. Well, this is just insanely untrue. Plants swap genetic material through pollination. That, of course, is why bees are so important. And it's estimated that just 0.5% of all organic food is in some way GMO. And if that's true, then this damage can probably not be undone. Unless your cheese is organic, it's likely GMO. GMO corn is an ingredient in most crackers and cereals. As well, most corn on the cob is GMO. You can find GMO cotton in your salad dressing. And over 50% of papayas from the US are GM crops. Canola oil and most processed foods are a product of GMOs. In fact, if you're eating processed foods, you might as well just assume it's GMO. Even if it says non-GMO, remember that nearly all livestock feed is now GMO. So while your eggs may be organic and GMO-free, the chickens could have been eating GMO food. So check for that. It's always best to know where your eggs are coming from, and if you can, just buy your own chickens. Now, GM soy is a lot in all kinds of things, cereals and breads and food additives. A lot of squash these days has GMO in it, as well as sugar beets. In fact, 95% of sugar beets on the market are GMO. This one is in particular is because sugar beets are essential for producing refined sugar, which is in nearly every single thing that we eat. So when it comes to talking about an epidemic in the United States, I don't talk about cigarettes or obesity. Obesity is the result of America's addiction to refined sugar. Not just America, of course, but the whole world, including Canada. Basically, most of us have an addiction to sugar in one way or another. Most wine is GMO these days, and also thanks to Monsanto's investments in Uruguay, GMO cannabis is now being developed. So GMO is essentially inserting genes into a plant's cells via bacteria. A newer method, however, uses enzymes to actually take out or replace specific parts of the DNA. But regardless, they are in effect playing with the plant's genome despite a lack of understanding in this field. Scientists may think that they have all the answers on genomes, but what's going to be the long-term effects from altering and splicing a plant's DNA? This is just like the scientific consensus in climate change or economics for that matter. In those fields, scientists plug numbers into a computer model to produce the results that they expect. At least in those fields, the worst that we get is bad economic policies, which for sure can make or break our standard of living, but they don't alter and potentially threaten the food supply or the whole planet's biodiversity. See, every time centralized governments have ever taken over agriculture, the results have been famine and ecological destruction. This is the system that the corporate state apparatus is offering us. Scientists, who are ignorant of economics, who rely on the status quo, tell us we have to accept GMOs, that we'll starve to death without it. Well, no, they'll starve to death without big government. You see, the burden of proof is on them. We know that state control of food supply only results in disaster. The market is demanding organic solutions. So just look at our options from the last 10 years and you'll see that. But state regulators and special interest groups are still supporting genetically modified crops. See, this is a very unfree market, both in scientific ideas and in practice. Until GMO debunkers can address these concerns, well, their bunk just has no legs to stand on. So thanks for tuning in today, folks. Please be sure to check out some of our previous videos that we've made on Monsanto in the future of food. And also be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more updates, and stay tuned for more video reports that we'll have coming very soon to pressfortruth.ca.